My name is Eleanor Vance. For my 67th birthday, I threw a party. I baked my son's favorite cake, set my best china, and waited. No one came. That same evening, my daughter-in-law posted photos of my entire family smiling on a cruise ship. They thought they had cast the old woman aside. They thought I would just fade away. They were wrong. I didn't get angry. Got proof. When they returned, I handed my daughter-in-law an envelope from a DNA lab that would burn her perfect, treacherous world to the ground. This is the story of how I took my family back. If you're ready for some long-overdue justice, make sure you subscribe and like this video. Let me know in the comments what you would have done. The aroma of slow-braised pot roast, rich with rosemary and thyme, had filled my house for hours. It was a scent that meant family, a scent that meant celebration. My house, the one Robert and I had filled with a lifetime of noise and laughter, had been painstakingly prepared. On the polished oak of the dining table, 4 place settings gleamed under the soft light. For David, his wife Tiffany, and my grandchildren Owen and Sophie. A 5th plate, mine, sat at the head of the table. In the center, a German chocolate cake, David's favorite since he was a boy, waited, its coconut pecan frosting a testament to an afternoon spent with sticky fingers and a happy heart. I was turning 67. It wasn't a milestone like 65 or 70, but it was my birthday, and I had been promised a party. Or rather, I had been allowed to throw one for myself, a fact I chose to ignore. 6 o'clock came and went. That was the agreed-upon time. "We'll be there at 6 sharp, Mom," David had said on the phone 2 days ago. I pictured them stuck in traffic, Tiffany probably sighing dramatically from the passenger seat of their oversized SUV. At 6:30, I sent a light-hearted text. "The roast is getting lonely. Hope you're all okay." I stared at the phone, waiting for the 3 little dots that signaled a reply. They never appeared. 7 o'clock bled into 7:30. The rich, welcoming aroma of the roast now seemed cloying, heavy. The silence in the house was a physical presence. It absorbed the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that usually comforted me but now felt like a countdown to a verdict. I walked over to the mantel, my fingers tracing the silver frames. David's graduation. Owen's first t-ball game. Sophie, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a dandelion. A life in pictures. My life. At 8 o'clock I accepted the truth. They were not coming. I took a single candle from the box, pushed it into the center of the perfect cake, and lit the wick. The tiny flame danced, casting flickering shadows across the empty chairs. I closed my eyes, took a breath to sing the song to myself, and felt the hot sting of a single unwelcome tear slide down my cheek. I blew out the candle, making no wish. I was scraping the untouched feast into plastic containers, the motions mechanical, my mind blessedly numb, when my tablet on the counter chimed with a notification. My heart gave a stupid little leap of hope. An apology. An explanation. I wiped my hands and tapped the screen. It opened to Tiffany's social media page. And there it was. The picture was blindingly bright. My family, my entire family, was huddled together on the deck of a massive cruise ship, the turquoise ocean sprawling behind them. David, my son, had his arms around Tiffany and Owen. Tiffany held a beaming Sophie in front of her. They were all wearing matching garish t-shirts that read, "Vance Family Vacation 2025. Tiffany's smile was the widest, a slash of perfect white teeth. The caption, posted 5 hours ago, was the final twist of the knife. "Surprise family getaway. So needed this. Hashtag family first, hashtag cruise life, hashtag making memories." The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. The world tilted, the cheerful blue of the digital ocean mocking the gloom of my kitchen. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't been in an accident. They had chosen this. They had packed bags, driven to a port, and boarded a ship, all while knowing I was here, waiting. Tiffany's hashtag family first, was an act of such breathtaking cruelty it was almost art. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of the tablet. My face was a pale, tired oval. The single tear had dried on my skin. And then something shifted. The hurt didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It hardened from a fragile, aching grief into something solid and cold. Something with weight. A slow, unfamiliar smile stretched my lips. It felt foreign on my face, sharp at the edges. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a decision being made. A smile like that doesn't bloom overnight. It's cultivated, seed by bitter seed, over years of careful tending by a master gardener of passive aggression. Tiffany had been that gardener. I remembered Owen's second-grade play. He was a tree, a small but vital role he'd practiced for weeks. Tiffany had sworn she told me the date. I only found out when I called David the day after, asking how it went. "Oh, Eleanor," she chimed in on the extension, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I feel just awful. I could have sworn I mentioned it when we last spoke." David had murmured something about her being forgetful, but the damage was done. Owen had looked for me in the crowd and hadn't found me. Then there was the Thanksgiving I'd suggested Sophie try a baked sweet potato instead of her third dinner roll. The next day David called, his tone strained. "Mom, Tiffany said you were criticizing her parenting in front of the whole family." My simple health suggestion had been twisted into a public indictment of her motherhood. I tried to explain, but it sounded defensive and petty. It was easier to just apologize. Year after year, the cuts were small but precise. The forgotten invitations. The family inside jokes I was never privy to. The way Tiffany would retell one of my stories but change a key detail to make me sound confused or dotty. She never confronted me, never raised her voice. It was always a whisper in David's ear later, a concerned look, a carefully worded text. She was positioning me as a well-meaning but increasingly burdensome relic of a bygone era. This cruise wasn't a simple oversight. It was a declaration. It was Tiffany, in her bright, boastful way, announcing that the Vance family had been officially restructured. And I was not a board member. I was not even a shareholder. I was a liability that had been written off. Staring at her smiling face on my tablet, I knew I would not be written off so easily. The new resolve was a fire in my veins, burning away the fog of hurt. It propelled me up the rickety pull-down stairs to the attic, a place I hadn't ventured in years. The air was thick with the scent of cedar and dust. I pulled the string for the single bare bulb, casting the cluttered space in a weak, yellow light. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Sign. A weapon. My eyes landed on a stack of neatly labeled cardboard boxes. I ran my fingers over the faded marker. David, childhood. With a grunt, I pulled the heavy box into the light. Inside was a time capsule of my son's life. His first baseball glove, a bundle of letters from summer camp, his high school diploma. And beneath it all, a faded file folder. Opened it. Report cards, school photos, and a thin sheaf of medical records. My eyes scanned the documents until they landed on a form from a hospital visit when he was 10, a broken arm from falling out of the oak tree in the backyard. His blood type was listed clearly. A positive. Froze. Positive. A rare enough type. My own is O negative. It wasn't the information itself that struck me, but the memory it triggered. It was from 2 years ago. Sophie had come home from school, ecstatic about a science lesson where they'd learned about blood types. She'd made me a get well soon card for a cold I had, and on the back she'd proudly drawn a little red blood cell and written, "I am O negative just like Grandma." At the time I'd smiled at the sweet, if slightly macabre sentiment. But now the pieces clicked together in my mind with a sickening snap. Robert, my late husband, had been A positive. I was O negative. It was genetically impossible for us to have a child who was also O negative. David, our son, was living proof of that with his A positive blood. So how could his daughter be O negative? The doubt was an old one, a tiny venomous thought I'd crushed the moment it appeared years ago. A stray comment Tiffany had made about Sophie not looking anything like David. A dismissive laugh. She must take after my side of the family. I had let it go. You don't entertain thoughts like that. Not about your son. Not about your grandchild. But now, standing in the dusty silence of the attic, the thought wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a roar. I walked down from the attic with the purpose of a general preparing for war. The grief was gone, replaced by an unnerving diamond-hard clarity. First, I went to my jewelry box. I bypassed the pearls and the simple gold chains and went straight to the velvet box at the bottom. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, was the sapphire necklace Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. Its deep blue was the color of his eyes. It was my most treasured possession. I closed the box without a moment's hesitation. Grief was a luxury. Ammunition was a necessity. A local jeweler, a discreet man I knew, would give me a fair price for it. It would be my war chest. With a plan for funding secured, I sat at my kitchen table, the tablet in front of me. I didn't search for cruise deals or vacation spots. My fingers typed, "Discreet private investigator. New England area." I spent an hour reading reviews, looking for words like professional, thorough, and confidential. I found a promising candidate, a Mr. Coleman, an ex-detective. I sent a concise email requesting a consultation. Next, I opened a new tab. At-home paternity DNA testing. Grandparent test. I scrolled through the scientific jargon of labs and diagnostic centers. It was all there. A simple swab from the grandparent and the child could establish a link, or lack thereof. It was clean. It was absolute. It was a truth that couldn't be twisted, retold, or explained away with a sympathetic smile. I shut the tablet. The house was still silent, but it no longer felt empty. Felt like a command center. The opening salvos of my campaign had been fired. They were off enjoying their stolen vacation, basking in the sun and their own smugness. They had no idea that back home, in the quiet, drafty house they'd abandoned, a storm was beginning to gather. And I was its architect. They returned a week later, their skin sun-kissed and their smiles offensively bright. They swept into my house on a wave of feigned remorse and loud, overlapping excuses. "Mom, we are so sorry," David began, avoiding my eyes as he set his luggage down in the hall. It was a last-minute cancellation, a deal Tiffany found online. We had to book it right then and there. "We felt just terrible," Tiffany added, rushing to give me an airy one-armed hug that smelled of expensive sunscreen. The cell service was practically non-existent on the ship, or I would have called a dozen times. She pulled back and presented me with a small, crinkling bag. "We brought you something." Inside was a snow globe. A cheap plastic dome containing a miniature cruise ship and flecks of iridescent glitter. On the base, written in a clumsy gold script, it said, "Greetings from the Caribbean." It was the kind of thoughtless trinket you buy out of sheer obligation at a port kiosk. It was an insult. I summoned the warmest smile I could muster. "Oh, you shouldn't have," I said, and for once I meant it. I placed the globe on an end table, a monument to their casual cruelty. "Don't you two worry about it for another second. The important thing is that you had a wonderful time and you're all home safe." David looked relieved, the guilt draining from his face. That was my son. Always willing to believe the easiest version of the truth. Tiffany, however, watched me with a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. She was searching for a crack in my performance, for the hurt she expected to see. She found none. I was a placid lake, and it unnerved her. She had wanted me to be wounded. My forgiveness was not part of her script. Mr. Coleman's office was on the second floor of a nondescript brick building, wedged between a dentist and an accountant. The man himself was just as unassuming, middle-aged, a bit soft in the middle, with a tired suit and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. The money from my sapphire necklace had been well spent. "Your daughter-in-law, Tiffany Vance," he began, sliding a thin folder across his desk toward me. "She maintains 3 credit cards her husband is not a co-signer on. The combined debt is a little over $42,000. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, but my face remained impassive. "Most of it is what you'd expect," he continued, tapping a page. Spas, high-end clothing stores, a few weekend trips to boutique hotels listed as business expenses. He paused. More interesting, however, is her work history. She left her previous job at a marketing firm quite suddenly 9 years ago. 2 months later, she announced she was pregnant with your younger grandchild, Sophie. He let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final piece. I spoke with a former co-worker of hers. Apparently, Mrs. Vance was exceptionally close with a senior partner at the firm. This friendship ended abruptly right around the time she quit. He slid a second piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout from a public records search. On it was a name and a photo of a handsome, dark-haired man. The senior partner. My breath caught in my throat. The man had the same dark, deep-set eyes and strong chin as my granddaughter, Sophie. A family resemblance I had tried so hard to unsee for years was now staring at me in black and white. A week later, I insisted on hosting a welcome-home dinner. Simple pot roast. Not the one they'd abandoned, but a fresh one. A reclamation of the meal. They came, assuming all was forgiven and forgotten. After the plates were cleared, I brought out a dusty, leather-bound photo album. I was going through some of Robert's old things, I said, my voice wistful. Look at this. I opened it to a picture of David's grandfather as a young man, tall and fair-haired. Then I turned the page to a photo of David at the same age. The resemblance was uncanny. It's remarkable, isn't it? I mused. How a family line can be so strong. I looked over at Owen, my older grandson. You have it too, sweetie. Your great-grandfather's smile. Owen beamed. Then I let my gaze drift to Sophie, who was coloring quietly at the end of the table. I looked from her dark hair to David's lighter brown, from her olive skin to his fair complexion. I sighed a soft, thoughtful sound. It's funny how genetics work, I said to the room at large, my eyes landing on Tiffany for just a fraction of a second. Sometimes they skip a generation. Or take a detour. The clatter of Tiffany's fork against her plate was the only sound. David didn't seem to notice, but I saw the color drain from Tiffany's face. She stared at me, her mouth a thin, hard line. It was a statement with no accusation, a question with no discernible point. It was a perfectly deniable move, and it had hit its target dead center. My chance came the following Saturday. David and Tiffany were going to a charity gala, and I had volunteered to babysit. "Oh, Mom, you don't have to," David had said. "Nonsense, I insist," I'd replied. "What are grandmothers for?" Once they were gone, I set up my station at the kitchen table. "Tonight," I announced to Owen and Sophie, "we are making art for the family tree." I'd bought canvases, paint, and a large pack of cotton swabs. I showed them how to dip the swabs in paint and create dotted, pointillist-style leaves on their hand-drawn trees. As Sophie worked, chattering away about her day, I carefully took the swab she'd been using, which was slick with paint and saliva, and placed it in a small plastic baggie labeled "Grandchild." Getting David's sample was easier than I'd anticipated. While putting the kids to bed, I went into their master bathroom to get a glass of water for Owen. On the counter, next to the sink, was David's electric toothbrush head. It was replaced weekly, a fact I knew from years of gift-giving. This one was nearly due for a change. No one would notice it was gone. I slipped it into a second baggie labeled "Alleged Father." The next Monday, I mailed the small, discreet package to the DNA diagnostics lab. The week of waiting was the longest of my life. I went about my days in a haze of forced normalcy, my entire being focused on the arrival of a single piece of mail. Finally it came. A plain manila envelope with no return address, just as I'd requested. My hands were perfectly steady as I slid it open with a butter knife. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It was covered in formal text and scientific-looking charts, but my eyes went straight to the bottom line, to the two words that would define the rest of our lives. Probability of paternity. 0%. 0. Not low. Not inconclusive. 0. An absolute. I read the word over and over again. All the suspicion, the whispers of doubt, the years of quiet observations. had all coalesced into this single undeniable fact. Felt no joy, no triumph, only the cold, heavy certainty of a mission validated. With the report tucked safely in my desk, the final piece of the plan clicked into place. I picked up the phone and dialed David's number. I practiced my voice first, making it warm, a little frail. "David, honey, it's Mom." "Hey, Mom. Everything okay?" he asked, his voice full of the casual cheer he used when he felt slightly guilty. "Everything's fine, dear. I've just been doing a lot of thinking lately," I said, letting a sigh tremble through the line. "And I've made a big decision. I'm ready to retire. Properly this time. And I need to have a family meeting to discuss. Well, to discuss the arrangements. My will, the house, all of it. It's very important to me that everyone is there." I could practically hear Tiffany's ears perk up from across town. A retirement announcement. Talk of wills and property. It was irresistible bait for a woman $42,000 in debt. "Of course, Mom," David said immediately. "When were you thinking?" We set the date for the following Friday night. "My house. I'll cook," I said. "We'll make it a proper family occasion." "Sounds great, Mom. We'll be there." Hung up the phone. On the table in front of me, the cheap snow globe from their cruise caught the afternoon light, the little ship frozen in its plastic sea. I looked from it to the desk drawer that held the DNA report. The trap was set. The invitations had been accepted. And for the first time in a very long time, I was looking forward to having my family over for dinner. The house was filled once again with the aroma of a roast, this time a perfectly browned chicken resting on a bed of root vegetables. The table was set with my best china, the plates I only used for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Everything gleamed, the silver, the crystal, the polished wood of the table. I wanted the scene to be one of undeniable civility, a perfect family portrait. Perfect stage. They arrived precisely at 7. David seemed relaxed, genuinely happy to be there. Tiffany, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with anticipation, her eyes scanning the room as if trying to appraise its contents. She was dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking dress, ready to receive what she clearly believed was a financial inheritance. The children were subdued, caught in the strange, formal energy of the evening. Dinner was a masterpiece of strained conversation. Tiffany dominated, talking at length about a prospective country club membership and the exorbitant cost of Owen's summer camp. David nodded along, offering a few words here and there, a dutiful son playing his part. I remained a gracious host, refilling wine glasses, offering more potatoes and smiling. I smiled as Tiffany dismissed my old china as charming but a bit dated. I smiled as she corrected a story David was telling about his childhood. I watched them, my family, moving and speaking in the warm light of my dining room. They were actors in a play whose final, shocking scene only I had read. There was a strange sense of detachment, of watching something from a great distance. Every bite of food, every sip of wine, was a step closer to the precipice. And I, the architect of this evening, was the only one who knew how close we were to the edge. When the last of the dessert plates were cleared, I remained seated. I let the silence settle for a moment, then folded my hands on the table in front of me. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice even and calm. It didn't waver. "As I mentioned, I have made some decisions about my future, about my retirement." Tiffany leaned forward almost imperceptibly, a glint in her eye. David looked at me with warm affection. "But before we discuss my future," I continued, "I have something I need to address. Piece of unfinished business. A matter of truth." I stood up, my joints protesting slightly, and walked to the sideboard. I picked up a crisp white business envelope. It felt heavy in my hand, dense with consequence. I walked back to the table, not to my seat, but to Tiffany's side. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. David's brow was furrowed. I extended the envelope to her. "I believe this belongs to you," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. Tiffany stared at the envelope. Her eyes flickered to the top left corner, where the logo of the DNA diagnostics lab was printed in small, discreet letters. Her face, flushed with wine and self-satisfaction moments before, turned the color of chalk. Tiffany produced a short, brittle laugh. "Eleanor, what is this? Some kind of bizarre joke?" She wouldn't touch the envelope. It lay on the table between us like a landmine. "Open it," I said. It wasn't a request. "Mom, what's going on?" David asked, his voice tight with confusion. He looked from my stony face to his wife's panicked one. "It's nothing, David. Your mother is just being dramatic," Tiffany snapped, pushing the envelope away with the tips of her manicured fingers. "If it's nothing, then open it," David insisted, his patience fraying. When she still refused, he reached across the table, his movements sharp and angry, and snatched the envelope himself. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he tore it open. I did not watch the paper. I watched my son. I watched his eyes scan the first few lines. His expression merely confused. I watched him reread them, a frown deepening on his forehead. And then I watched as his gaze fell to the bottom of the page. The change was terrifying to behold. It wasn't a sudden gasp or an outcry. It was a hollowing out. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a waxy, ashen gray. His jaw worked silently, and the life, the light, the sun I knew vanished from his eyes. They became the flat, dead eyes of a stranger. When he finally looked up, he didn't look at me. He looked at his wife, the love of his life, the mother of his children, and he looked at her as if he'd never seen her before in his life. "What is this?" David's voice was unrecognizable, a low, guttural rasp. He slid the paper across the table. "Tiffany, explain this." The dam of Tiffany's composure finally broke. Hysteria erupted. "It's a lie. It's a trick. Your mother has always hated me, David, you know she has. She's a vindictive old woman trying to tear our family apart." She pointed a shaking finger at me. I did not flinch. I just stood there, a silent executioner. "Explain the paper, Tiffany," David repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "It was a mistake. A long time ago. It meant nothing." The words tumbled out of her, a frantic, incoherent torrent of excuses. "I was lonely. You were always working. He was just there. It was a moment of weakness. It has nothing to do with us, with our family." "Our family." David's laugh was a horrifying, broken sound. "It says here the probability that I am Sophie's biological father is 0%. 0. So tell me again about our family." The words, spoken aloud, hung in the air like a death sentence. 0. From the doorway to the hall, a small gasp. Owen stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with a terror he couldn't possibly comprehend but felt with every fiber of his being. He had heard it all. Tiffany's confession devolved into desperate, ugly sobs. She tried to blame me, to blame David, to blame the man whose name she wouldn't speak. It was a pathetic, wretched display, and with every word, she dug her own grave a little deeper. David stood up, the motion slow and deliberate, like an old man rising. He looked at the wreckage of his life, his weeping, unfaithful wife, his traumatized children, his silent, implacable mother. He looked at Tiffany, and all the rage, all the hurt seemed to drain away, leaving something cold and absolute in its place. "Get your purse, Tiffany," he said. The calmness of his voice was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. "David, please," she begged, reaching for his hand. He recoiled as if from a snake. "Get your purse. And get out of my mother's house. We can fix this. We can work through this." "No," he said, the word a final, unappealable judgment. "We can't. Go to a hotel. I'll have some of your things sent over tomorrow. A lawyer will be in touch." He walked over to the front door and held it open, his body a rigid silhouette against the dark night outside. He did not yell. He did not argue. He simply waited. Defeated, Tiffany stumbled to her feet, grabbed her purse from the chair, and walked past him without another word. Her face a mess of tears and ruined makeup. David shut the door behind her, the click of the latch echoing through the house like a gunshot. He turned, not looking at me, but at the half-eaten meal on the table. The perfect family portrait was shattered, the canvas torn to ribbons. He sank into a chair, put his head in his hands, and for the first time that night, his body was racked with a silent, shaking sob. The cancer had been cut out, but the wound was deep, and it was bleeding all over my dining room floor. The morning after was worse than the storm itself. I came downstairs to find the dining room exactly as we'd left it, a battlefield of half-eaten food, smeared plates, and abandoned wine glasses. The silence was absolute, heavier than any I had ever felt in this house. David was asleep on the living room sofa, still in his dinner clothes. He looked like a fallen statue, broken and pale. He slept for most of the next 2 days, a deep, exhaustive sleep of a man whose world had been pulled out from under him. I didn't wake him. I simply made coffee, cleaned up the wreckage from the dinner party, and sat in the armchair across from him, watching him breathe. When he finally emerged from his cocoon of grief, he was a ghost. He moved through my house without a word, his eyes vacant. I didn't push him to talk. I didn't say, "I told you so." My revenge had been for him, but this part, the agonizing aftermath, was his to navigate. My role had changed. The avenger had served her purpose. Now I had to be a mother again. I made him soup he didn't eat, toast he barely touched, and sat with him in a silence that was not empty, but full of a shared, unspoken sorrow. I had given him a terrible truth, and I realized then that wielding the weapon was easy. It was staunching the bleeding that required real strength. The most difficult task was facing the children. David was too lost in his own pain to be of any help, so they stayed with me. Owen, at 10 years old, was old enough to understand betrayal, if not the specifics of it. He found me in the kitchen a few days later. His expression clouded. "Is Mom not coming back because of the paper Grandma gave her?" he asked, his voice small. I knelt so I was at his eye level, my heart aching for him. "Sometimes, sweetie," I said carefully, choosing my words as if walking through a minefield. "Grown-ups make very big, very sad mistakes. And it causes messes that take a long time to clean up. None of it, not one single bit, is your fault. Your dad and I love you very much." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded and let me hug him. Sophie was another story. She was the innocent epicenter of the earthquake, completely unaware that she was the cause. She just knew her mother was gone and her father was sad. She would crawl into my lap and ask when Mommy was coming home. Had no answer. All I could do was offer the unconditional, uncomplicated love she deserved. We baked cookies. We read stories in the garden. We built a fortress of normalcy around her, a loving lie to protect her from a truth she wasn't ready to bear. My revenge had been for my son, but my penance, I knew, would be for his daughter. Tiffany did not go quietly into the night. About a week after she was thrown out, my lawyer called. "Eleanor, Mrs. Vance is making some demands," he said, his voice weary. "She's claiming emotional distress, suing for a punitive settlement, and is threatening to fight for sole custody, claiming David's emotional state and your malicious interference make it an unsafe environment for the children." The old, cold resolve washed over me once more. The shrew was showing her true colors. "Fight her," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Use the report from Mr. Coleman. Her credit card debt, the affair. We will countersue for fraud. We will prove she entered into this marriage under false pretenses. Protect my son and protect those children. Spare no expense." It was a short, ugly battle. When faced with a mountain of evidence against her, the DNA test being the immovable peak, Tiffany's case crumbled. Her lawyers saw there was no payday to be had. Faced with the threat of a fraud lawsuit and the public humiliation of the truth, she relented. She accepted a modest, court-mandated divorce settlement and a supervised visitation schedule. She had tried to play one last card, and she had lost spectacularly. The seasons turned. Autumn gave way to a cold, bleak winter, which slowly surrendered to the hesitant warmth of spring. The passage of time was our greatest ally. David, with the help of a therapist and the quiet routine of our lives, began to heal. He sold the house he had shared with Tiffany, a place of ghosts and lies, and moved with the children into a smaller home just a few blocks from me. The most beautiful thing to watch was his relationship with Sophie. After the initial shock, after the anger and grief, something remarkable happened. He chose her. He was there for her homework, for her bedtime stories, for wiping away her tears when she missed the woman she still called Mom. He was not her biological father, but he was, in every single way that mattered, her dad. His love for her was not an obligation, but a conscious, daily decision. It was an act of grace that made me prouder than I had ever been. Our own bond, which had been frayed by years of Tiffany's manipulations, was forged anew. It was quieter now, more honest. One evening, as we sat on my porch, he turned to me. "Thank you, Mom," he said. I thought he meant for the revenge. "You don't have to thank me, David." "No," he said, looking me in the eyes. "Not for that. Thank you for being here. After. I wouldn't have made it without you." A year to the day after my silent party, I turned 68. There was no grand celebration. There were no caterers, no tiered cake, no crowd of reluctant family members. There was only the smell of charcoal from the grill in my backyard. David manned the barbecue, flipping burgers with an easy smile. Owen and a neighborhood friend were chasing each other across the lawn, their shouts filling the air. And Sophie, my sweet Sophie, was sitting beside me on the patio steps, carefully creating a drawing with a box of new crayons. After we ate, David brought out a small cupcake with a single glowing candle. They sang to me, their voices happy and slightly off-key. As I blew out the candle, I didn't have to wish for anything. Owen gave me a framed photo of him at his latest baseball game. David gave me a beautifully restored antique writing desk, a project he'd been working on in his garage for months. Then Sophie came forward, holding up her drawing. It was a picture of a house, my house. In front of it were 4 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. There was David, Owen, me, and her right in the middle. I looked at my son, a man remade by truth. I looked at my grandchildren, safe and loved. I looked at the small, imperfect, but profoundly real family we had built from the ashes. A smile spread across my face. It wasn't the cold, sharp smile of a year ago. It was warm. It was genuine. It was content. The revenge was over. The restoration was complete. And so, my family is smaller now, but the love is real. We are no longer living a lie. The quiet peace in my backyard is worth more than all the loud, fake parties in the world. But I have to ask you, the person who has followed my story, to save my family, I first had to destroy it. Looking at my happy grandchildren, I believe I made the right choice. But what do you think? Comment below. Was I a hero protecting her family, or did I become a villain to fight one? There's no in between. Tell me.